Wow, you really came. Thank you. Jeez, now that I've got here, I better do a good job. Anyways, I really appreciate you coming out and supporting me and helping me raise money for our fantastic art gallery here in Warkworth. So if you haven't checked it out, it's at the very end of this street. All right. Well, welcome to my afternoon of short stories. An entire show just about Kevin. Now, if it all goes well, you'll be free in about an hour. And if it doesn't go well, it's just going to feel a hell of a lot longer. Anyways, let's get started. The first story I'm going to tell, I'm about 12 years old, and I'm in grade 6, and I'm attending Grand Valley Public School. And the story is called Sylvia. Now remember that. Sylvia. Kevin, can I see you out in the hallway? It was always bad news when my name was called out in class. Kevin, will you keep quiet? Sit still. Today was no different. I knew it had to be over yesterday's spelling test. So I dragged myself out into the hallway. Spelling was my horror. The only time I ever passed a test is when we got to pass our sheets forward and I bribed Lorette Laguerre to cheat for me. I remember getting my first speller in grade 3, and Mother helping me at the kitchen table and asking me to spell the word the. Well, in my head, I got the letters all mixed up, and I put the E before the H. Mother slammed the book shut. You're not trying. I am too. She shook her head in disbelief. Why is it, Kevin, that you can remember every cow's name in the barn and you can't spell a 3-letter word? What? Did she actually expect me to have an answer to such a stupid question? My spelling only got more problematic as I got older because of the swollen amount of words that I was supposed to know. By the time I was in grade 5, I was so far behind, I was barely hanging on. That was the year I had Mr. Naismith, a fire and brimstone teacher who ruled with his yardstick. He picked on kids, me in particular. Once, he handed back a spelling test in order of the best to the worst. And lastly, there's Kevin, who got 0 out of 10. I looked down at all the red X's on my paper. Did you even open up your book? He said, making the whole class laugh. Oh, I was a big disappointment to Mr. Naismith. You see, my brother was in his class last year, the ideal student. Keith was smart, well-behaved, good at sports. I was none of these things. In fact, I was inflicted with what they called the invitus dance, which made me fidgety and really affected my concentration. Mr. Naismith's response to this was to slam his yardstick down on my desk. This did not help. So when I told him so, he sneered and said I was full of gall. Well, I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it wasn't good. One afternoon, while eating my 4 slices of after-school toast in the kitchen, Mother came in. Guess what, she said. Your father sold the farm. Well, It was shocking news. The farm meant everything to me. But I still feel a pang of guilt when I think back to that moment. Because instead of feeling devastated, I felt relieved. If we moved away, I would be free of Mr. Naismith. That's how bad things were for me. Mother was just playing a prank. Dad hadn't sold the family farm. He'd sold another farm we owned 2 concessions over. It never occurred to tell Mom and Dad that I was being bullied by Mr. Naismith. I mean, it was my fault. I was a bad student. I goofed off, I didn't pay attention. Really, I didn't care. He told me several times that he was going to have to fail me, which, on top of the humiliation, meant I would have him again next year. I dreaded that last day of school when he handed me the green envelope containing my report card. I didn't want to open it in front of anyone, so I sneaked out of the classroom and I went to the bathroom and I locked myself into the cubicle and slid it out. Past me. Although Kevin was unable to complete the work of grade 5, I have decided to let him move on with the hope that he will apply himself more next year. I was so ecstatic that I actually went back to his classroom and I thanked him. Yes, my parents had taught me well. But as an adult, I've had different fantasies about how that fantasy for the most abusive scholastic year of my life should have played out. I imagine going back into his room as a full-grown man and hoofing that bastard as hard as I can and watching him fall to the ground. Don't you ever treat a kid like that again. Next fall, I was excited about getting a new start. According to my report card, I had a teacher named Mrs. Haggerty, someone I'd never heard of. Unfortunately, Mrs. Haggerty turned out to be Miss Hanasack, who had simply marched up the marriage aisle over the summer and changed her name. And Miss Hanasack had been my brother's teacher the year before. So much for a fresh start. It was Mrs. Haggerty who called me out into the hallway. I knew it would be only a matter of time before she'd start singing Keith's praises. But no, she did the strangest thing. She lowered herself down onto the steps right in the middle of the hallway, and she patted for me to sit down beside her. Now, Kevin, I didn't just call you out here because you failed the spelling test. I see that you had most of the letters right. They were just mixed up. That makes me think that there is a smart boy inside you. We just need to find a way of pulling him out. Smart boy? I was confused. How could my failing a spelling test ever make her think that? I think, Kevin, if you had some special attention, you could do better. Oh no, please. After a year of Mr. Naismith's special attention, I want no more of that. I want to put you on a special program for the next 6 weeks, where we meet at my desk and go over your work twice a week. Was this some kind of trick? I thought she was going to call me out here and yell at me for being stupid. Instead, she said she thought there was a smart boy inside me. This means you'll be doing work separate from the class. Some things you like. Do you think you can handle that? Things I like? Well, that sounded promising. I nodded my head. At the end of the program, I'll write your mother and report on your progress. But Kevin, I'm only willing to do this if you will promise me you'll do your best. Well, no teacher had ever paid this kind of attention to me. I mean, her kindness made me want to do my best. So I looked her straight in the eye so she would know I meant it with all my heart. My best. I don't think I've ever done that before. What was that all about? Lorraine said when I got back to my desk. Can't talk now. Got to get to work. Work? She said, screwing up her face. Yes, schoolwork. During those 6 weeks, I did tons of book reports, which was an odd choice given the fact that reading was next to impossible for me. But I bent the rules so drastically that a lesser person than Mrs. Haggerty would have accused me of cheating. In Sunday school, we got these little comic booklets, that told the different Bible stories. So I decided I would do book reports on all of those. Now, Mrs. Haggerty, while remaining positive, questioned the validity of my choice. Kevin, these aren't exactly books. The Bible is made up of many books, I informed her, in case she didn't know. Her lips parted in a sweet smile. Yes, I suppose you're right. It thrilled me to make her laugh. It made me think that she liked me. On the surface, it seemed like I had dramatically strayed from her original intentions. But Mrs. Haggerty didn't seem to care. She only encouraged my enthusiasm. One day when I was up at her desk, she suggested that instead of writing another book report, then maybe I could write my own story. Well, what about? Well, you've got a good imagination, Kevin. It could be about anything. Oh. Thought for a moment about her suggestion. I think I'd like to write a play. A play? Really? Well, what a fantastic idea. I can't wait to read it. But that evening, as I sat down at the kitchen table to write it, I couldn't get past all my spelling mistakes. All my ideas just looked so messy on paper, I just wanted to crumple them up and throw them away. Mrs. Haggerty was going to be so disappointed in me. What are you doing? My sister Kathy said when she came into the kitchen. I'm trying to write a play, but look at this mess. Kathy seemed to understand my dilemma when she looked down at all the scribbly scrawls. Well, if you want, I could type it up for you. Seriously? So we went up to her room, dressed in our winter coats, because it was January and there's absolutely no heat upstairs in our farmhouse. And I walked her right through the play. Marched back and forth in front of the computer, told her what each character said and what they did. And she typed it all down. And when my play was finished, the sheets with it on it looked so clean and perfect. Kathy even stapled it together at the top. I couldn't wait to show Mrs. Haggerty, and I showed it to her first thing the next morning. After she read it, she called me up to her desk. Well, very good. Are you sure you wrote it? There's not a spelling mistake in it. Well, I informed her that Kathy had typed it up, but all the ideas were mine. And I said that my ideas always look this good in my head, and if I had someone to type them up, they wouldn't look so jumbled on paper. Jumbled? She gave me a curious look, as if trying to understand what I meant. Mrs. Haggerty was the one person who came closest to discovering I had a learning disability. But in the 1970s, few teachers had even heard of the word dyslexia, let alone what to do about it. Well, Kevin, you know, your play is so good. I think that we should perform it for our morning assembly next month. What? In front of the whole school? Would you be willing to direct it? I said yes, even though I didn't know what that meant. It was thrilling to discover directing meant being the boss. She let me pick my own cast and take the troupe to the auditorium to practice all by ourselves. No teacher. I picked my friends. Well, bad move. They only wanted to goof off. No way it was going to happen in front of the whole school. Not only did I make them memorize their lines, but they had to say them exactly as they were meant to be said. Now, I am still friends with one of those hapless cast members. He claims that I fired the whole lot and replaced them. But I don't remember such draconian measures. But I wouldn't put it past me. I was crushing so hard on Mrs. Haggerty, nothing was going to stop me from doing my best. Besides being kind, Mrs. Haggerty was equally beautiful. She had this very blonde hair and wore very short miniskirts. And she was young, probably like no more than 22 or 23. And she must have been short because she always came to school in these high heels that she forever complaining about. The moment she'd get into the classroom, she'd kick them off to the corner, claiming they were killing her feet. She once confessed to the illegal act, according to her, of driving all the way from Brampton barefoot. The boys, we were always telling sexy jokes about her. Once, Clinton Howard, he purposely threw his eraser under her desk. And then when he went to retrieve it, he looked up her skirt. And she wasn't wearing any panties. But he was a bigger liar than even me. When my 6 weeks came to an end, Mrs. Haggerty handed me a white envelope while I was waiting for the bus line. On the envelope was written, Mrs. Shortt. I saw that she hadn't sealed it, so I sneaked off to my bathroom cubicle. Dear Mrs. Shortt, I am very pleased with Kevin's progress, effort, and attitude since we last talked. He is working hard in all subjects. Your son continues to be responsible, enthusiastic, and helpful. Good work, Kevin. And she signed it, Sylvia Haggerty. She had a first name. All the way home on the bus, I kept rolling Sylvia off my tongue. It sounded so elegant. At the end of the school year, I bought her a bar of Chinese soap. It was the most exotic thing that our hometown of Grand Valley offered it. I took it home and I wrapped it 14 times. It took her forever to get into it. Oh no, not another layer. She never ran out of patience with me. I wanted her to know that every one of those layers was a thank you. Thank you for caring. Oh, and thank you for the play. And thank you for all those nice things you said in the letter. On the last day of grade 6, she handed out rewards to every student in the class. Lorraine Laguerre, best speller. Todd Stark, best athlete. When she came to me, she announced that I was going to receive a triple award to the best actor, director, and writer in the class, Kevin Shortt. Imagine me, best writer. Man, I'd come a long way from the dunce seat of Mr. Naismith's class. Mrs. Haggerty probably has no idea of the profound impact she had on me. She ignited something in me so tangible that I carried it right out of her classroom and into the real world. In grade 7, I won the citizenship award for the whole school. In grade 8, I actually ran for student council president and won. In high school, I started my own community theater, and before going to university, I traveled right around the world. Things that took great gall and great confidence. The gall I apparently had. The confidence she helped me find. I'll always remember grade 6, not only as the year that I failed the most important spelling test of my life, but as the year I fell in love with Sylvia Haggerty. Thank you. All right, one story down. I have since tried to find Sylvia Haggerty to thank her, but no luck. You see, unlike all the other teachers in our high school or in our public school, she wasn't from our community. She lived in the faraway city of Brampton, and I have no idea how she ever ended up in the boondocks of Grand Valley. But it looks like the year after she taught me, she found a job closer to home, because she left the school and just disappeared into the ether. Now, at this point, I was hoping to introduce the other hero of this story, my magnanimous sister Kathy, who typed up my very first manuscript. But her whole family has come down with the flu, so they had to stay away. Now, there are a couple of other things that I do remember from grade 6. That was the year that I perfected my Donald Duck voice. Hello! Oh, I'm so happy you are here. I can't tell you what a stellar skill that is to have when you're 12 years old. Now, the other amazing feat I accomplished was learning the alphabet that year, backwards. Z, Y, X, and W, V, U, T, S, and R, Q, P, O, N, M, and L, K, J, I, H, G, and F, E, D, C, D, A. Does that not just scream dyslexia? Now, I'll always be grateful to Mrs. Haggerty and all that special attention she gave to me. But as is my wont, I might have taken this just a little too far. Because this boost of confidence, because at the age of 19, I announced to my parents that I was going to take a trip by myself around the world, hitchhiking. Yes, you could imagine how well that went down. And despite their efforts, they could not convince me of the lunacy of this, me, a farm boy, with no travel experience, just picking up and globetrotting around the world. But I bought a guidebook. I mean, how hard could it be? As you can imagine, on the day that I was supposed to leave, there was a fair amount of tension. I told my mom and dad, no, you don't need to take me to the airport. You know, I should just get into this groove of hitchhiking right from the get-go. The least we are going to do is put you on a plane. My mother snapped. Well, that was all fine and dandy, but there was a problem with that. You see, they just imagined that I was going to be leaving from the Toronto airport. But my plan was to hitchhike to New York City, because in 1982, the cheapest way to get to Europe was with Icelandic Air. For $199, I could fly from New York to Iceland to Luxembourg. But this was a detail I was hesitant to share with my parents. So I didn't. So on the day of my departure, my mom and dad, along with my two younger sisters, and I don't know, just for good reason, two neighbors, we all piled into the car and headed off to Toronto. Now, with 7 less arriving at the wrong airport, I was guaranteed a sizable audience for the shit show that was about to ensue. I had no plan on how to get out of this. Don't you think you guys should be getting home? What airline are you flying with? My mom asked. Oh, airline, yes. It's a standby flight. So it could be any airline. Well, that landed like the BS it was. What? Don't you have a phone number? Yes, of course I have a phone number. I didn't. I'll call once you leave. Oh, for crying out loud, you'll call right now so we know everything's set. Good idea, I heard myself say, as they marched me off to a payphone. Yes, remember those? I checked my pockets, but didn't have any change. So my dad gave me a dime. I picked up the receiver, I slipped the dime in, and then I just randomly dialed a number. Mercifully, no one picked up. Hello, I said into the dial tone. This is Kevin Shortt. Yes, we talked a few weeks ago. Oh, yeah, you remember me. Oh, good, yes. Well, I was just checking to make sure you had me on the standby list for tonight. Now I paused, giving the person enough time to check her list. Oh, really? Oh, that's great. I'm second from the top. Oh, what's that? Oh, your office here in the airport doesn't open until 7 o'clock this evening. Oh, well, no, that's all right. I'm here now. You know, I'll just wait around. You see? We lived on a dairy farm. And the golden rule, those cows have to be milked at 6 in the morning and 6 at night. So I knew there was no way the whole family could stick around. So I hung up, confident I had pulled it off. But that's when my dime came tumbling down the car. Well, that's weird, my sister said. Why'd you get your money back? I guess it's my lucky day. I offered the dime back to Dad, but he said to keep it. So, he looked at his watch. Yeah, well, I guess we should be heading back. The cows will be waiting. Sadly, I felt no relief in watching them go. I mean, if truth be told, I was scared and woefully unprepared for this whole adventure. But it was all of my own making. If I'd left from a normal airport on a normal plane, I could have had a normal goodbye. Fortunately, there was no time to mope, because here I was, stuck in the wrong airport, no map and no idea how to get to New York City. Not knowing what else to do, I went to the information desk. Well, the lady there confessed that in all her years of working there, she had never been asked how to hitchhike to New York City. But the good woman turned out to be a godsend. She said her shift ended at 4 o'clock and that she could take me as far as Hamilton. Is that on the way? Yeah, I think so. That night, before it got dark, I made it all the way to Grimsby. But fortunately, my friend Demi lived in Grimsby. I looked her up in my trusty address book, found her house, knocked on her door. Hi, remember me? I'm here for the night. She was, surprised to see me, but I think pleased. Her parents, much less so. Anyways, the next morning, I was up at the crack of dawn and I was off. At Niagara Falls, I had to pay a dime to walk across the Rainbow Bridge. Thank you, Dad. Once in America, the road to New York lay in front of me, 400 miles away. But apparently, I was flying on horseshoes, because I actually made it to the Icelandic desk in the JFK airport that night by 6:45. I bought my ticket and I was on board for takeoff by 7:30. And the amazing thing, my whole adventure to New York was done on my father's dime. Okay, so this next story I wrote during the pandemic. So during lockdown, my friend Mary called me and she said, well, now that we have all this time together, we should do something creative. So what we came up with is that every week we just pick a random subject, like getting lost, too close for comfort. And we had to write a true personal story. In total, we wrote over 20. Now, on this particular week, the theme was moving in. Here's my story. People often ask how I ended up living in such an eccentric house. Well, the short answer is, I was having problems sleeping. My troubled nights started after a surgeon ripped out my right lung. Now don't get me wrong, it was an operation that saved my life, but it so disturbed my nervous system that I couldn't sleep. Now I tried everything, melatonin, visualizing peaceful settings, getting up and reading, but to no avail. And the constant night after night of insomnia left me feeling wretched and desperate. So, when a friend mentioned a Buddhist retreat that might reset my vibes, I was keen, thinking this would be my ticket back to the land of Nod. The application form was excessively personal. Like right down to one's alcohol and cannabis usage. Upon receiving my request, the meditation center called me with concerns. The lady said they were hesitant to accept me because of all my various ailments. Insomnia, lung cancer, Crohn's disease. I know, it's amazing, I'm still here. Anyways, after drilling me with more questions, she concluded that they would need a signed medical form stating that I was both physically and emotionally strong enough to endure their course. So, off I went to my good doctor, slightly embarrassed to have to ask for what I needed. He had a good laugh, but he signed the form and he sent me away with his blessings. Now, to the uninitiated, like my doctor and myself, a 10-day meditation retreat sounds kind of divine, peaceful. I was soon to discover this was not going to be the case, at least not with the hardcore Buddhists I had teamed up with. Sure, it was great to be, out of society for 10 days, disconnected, but here, living the life of a Buddhist monk was no easy walk in the pagoda, believe me. There was no gesturing, no talking, no eye contact. Obviously, no sex, not even with oneself. Wake up was at 4 a.m. with only 2 meals a day, and the last one at 11 o'clock a.m. But the real pièce de résistance was 10 one-hour sittings of meditation every day. Spirituality through austerity, a route that cuts right through to the bare bones of one's loneliness. It was a pleasant wintry drive, sunshine all the way to New York State. Yes, I have a car now, no more hitchhiking. At the check-in desk, the woman pointed to a sign behind her. Look over this list and make sure you're not taking in any of these items. Well, there was the anticipated no drugs, no alcohol, but then a total ban on books and magazines and all religious icons. I informed the woman I was clean. So, she assigned me to my sleeping cell, a cubicle stripped of all adornments, 2 wooden beds, 2 wooden chairs, and just a curtain across the front for privacy. Now, as a first-timer, I was partnered with a more experienced meditator. Curtis was to be my roommate. A long-haired granola type, like almost everybody in this place. Anyways, we greeted each other and talked briefly. The first time is always the hardest, he told me. Oh, you've done this many times? Oh, yes. This is my 7th time. Jeez, what a loot. Oh, that's incredible. Although it's hard, he said, just don't give up. Well, those were his parting words as the bell rang, informing us that it was time to slip into silence. It was not relationship. For the next 10 days, we would not speak, even look at each other, all the time sharing this small, intimate space. We were ushered off to the meditation hall for our first session. I didn't realize how painful it would be to sit cross-legged for an hour at a time. For the first 3 days, we were to follow the breath in and out of the nostrils. 3 days of just that. The idea was, it was to sharpen our mind. Well, and clearly, mine did feel a bit, cloudy and dark. At first, the meditation did feel good. Kind of like a deep house cleaning. But then after a while, I started feeling kind of lonely in all this solitude. You know, I staggered through the first couple of days. That felt like an eternity. I had no idea how I was ever going to make it through 10. Certainly fantasized about fleeing. But the Buddhists, they blocked my exit by taking my car keys. Sit in your discomfort, was the advice from the guru, who claimed not to be a guru, despite making us listen to hours and hours of his non-dogma. The point is to eliminate distractions, to empty your mind. That's when you'll find out who you really are. The pain in my knee was excruciating. No matter how many pillows I amassed underneath. Oh, will that damn bell never ring? The hardest part is those last few minutes before the final ding. Even then, there's little relief. You know, I hobble outside only to have to return in a few minutes to do it all over again. After a while, I did sense that my mind was lighter and more focused. Most amazingly, my sleep was better. As the meditation emptied my mind, there seemed to be this equal urge to clutter it up again. Because, you know, a clear mind just feels more empty. And with fewer thoughts swirling in my head to entertain me, I felt even more lonely. Now, instead of focusing on the big stuff, my mind seemed to be drawn to the subtle and insignificant. Things so inconsequential that I had totally forgotten about it. Now, perhaps it was being in this bohemian environment, but my mind kept going back to a place when I was more long-haired myself. I remembered way back in the 80s reading an article in the Harold Smith magazine about this man in Quebec who had built a house using straw bales. Well, it looked really cool. I mean, not at all like the Hobbit house I thought it would look like. But honestly, in all those intervening years, I can't say I ever thought about that again. I was certainly unaware of some deep-seated dream of building such a place. But here, in Buddhist boot camp, I was obsessed with the idea. Over and over, I kept stuffing my head with straw, just like the scarecrow. By the end of the 10 days, not only had my sleep been restored, but I was convinced that Jack and I should build a straw bale house. For the last afternoon of the retreat, the veil of silence is lifted. Curtis, my roommate, was keen to find out, how it had gone for me. Well, I didn't sugarcoat it and told him, how I wanted to flee. But I didn't give up, and I stayed. And now my sleep is better, and I have this crazy idea to build a straw bale house. A straw bale house, he said. Yeah, I know. It sounds wacky. You probably never heard of it. But it is a real thing. Oh, no. I know all about it. That's what I do. I build straw bale houses. In fact, I'm here with a couple of colleagues. We did this retreat to get in the right headspace for our next project. What the? How freaky is that? Back home, Jack was all keen to embark on this new project. So, in the farmhouse that we were renting with some friends, we were in the living room, busily drawing new floor plans for our house when Kim walked in. So, she looked at us, suspecting something. What are you two up to? Jack grinned and said, Kevin and I are building a straw bale house. Really? Can Roberto and I join you? And that's how we became a gang of 4. Now, building a house from the ground up is no small undertaking. There was no project manager. Everything we did on our own. We built it with our own sweat and our tears and one of Jack's fingers. Our land was just 35 acres of barren fields. There's no buildings, no road, no water, ground zero. So the first thing we needed was a place to live. So we constructed these amazing canvas cabins, that rival those amazing tents found on the African savannah. So for that first year, we built a couple of outbuildings, just to see if any of these natural building techniques actually worked. So for these buildings, we used reclaimed windows and doors. Bad move. They all had to be replaced. To mud the walls, we painstakingly dug clay from a lake 40 miles away. Next time, just order a truckload of mud. We pounded cow dung, into the floor, a la third world. But cow shit really isn't as glorious as they claim. The big house, it's going to get a cement floor. We learned a lot that first year, but not everything. The next year, we put up a windmill and we installed solar panels. We were off the grid and flying by the seat of our pants. Up we went, stacking those straw bales into walls, only to have them blown down. So we repiled them, this time sewing and mudding and securing them into place. Friends came by the dozens, helping us to hang rafters and drag buckets of mud up 2 floors. God, what were we thinking? We made mistakes. We bickered. We laughed. We argued. We corrected most of our mistakes. And then late at night, after work, we danced to the Buddha bar while doing dishes in the kitchen tent. The sun poured down and the rain drenched us, but we didn't give up. Every weekend, the 4 of us kept showing up. Yes, this was done on extended weekends. Kim, Roberto, and I still had full-time work in the city. And the demands just weren't physical. There was the emotional stress of putting all your money and faith into such a whimsical project. 4 people, 2 couples, 1 day, 1 straight, building a house to live in together. Now, the odds of that succeeding were staggeringly depressing. But we continued. It took longer than we thought, years. It cost more, but not outrageously so. It's all finished now. Well, almost. It has been almost 20 years since the 4 of us have moved into that house that turned out grander than any of us ever imagined. How's that for beating the odds? It's interesting to look back at how the dominoes fell. First, my lung collapses while I'm on a plane flying to Costa Rica. Then I find out I have cancer, and I have to undergo this invasive surgery that leaves me sleepless. So I decide to go to a meditation retreat where the woo-woo gods wake up this vision in me. What was that bizarre connection between me and those other builders? Who knows? But what I do know, if it wasn't for that Buddhist boot camp, I think it's highly unlikely that I would be living in a straw bale house today. Okay, you're still with me, it looks like. We're on the home stretch, just one more story to go. But first, I'd like to introduce the other players in that Strawdale house. Primero, my partner in crime for the last 27 years, Mr. Jack Bond. Give away, Jack. Now, I may be the ideas guy, but he is the brains behind it that makes it work. There is little that that man cannot figure out. And then, there is our amazing co-conspirators, Kim and Roberto Chiatti, right at the back. Now, as you can imagine, it takes an enormous amount of tolerance and forgiveness for four independent adults to make a communal house work. But we seem to be doing it so far. And perhaps now the glue that keeps us most stuck together is the fact that we are so far into this, there's no getting out. We are totally dependent on each other. Okay. So on to the last story. So this is perhaps the very first story I wrote, with the exception of that stellar play of grade 6. I wrote it about 30 years ago, and it's about my father and me and the selling of our farm. Now, my mom and dad are both here today. Where are you? Here, give away. Going strong at 91 and 93, so you can identify them and you pass on your condolences for having suffered the challenges of having to raise such a off-the-grid son. All right. So the story is called My Father's Auction. There were no for sale signs put up on our farm. My father wouldn't have it. After nearly 60 years, there was no way he was going to have sold stamped across his life. I never understood if it was because he was too proud or too private. Well, in many ways, it was like he was trying to keep a secret. But from whom? We all knew small towns kept no secrets. My father did not want to sell. It had taken him years to make up his mind, which was unusual because he'd always been such a decisive man. Even in a complicated birth, inoculated with death, he knew how to decide. How to choose between the calf and the cow. This farm was my father's dream, an empire built with his own hands. He did not want to sell. He wanted a son who would pick up and carry on. All summer, I dreaded this last day as we edged our way through the last haying, the final harvest. Then, like the swiftness of an incoming storm, it was upon us. Cars, trucks, and cattle wagons lined the roads in all directions. Strangers were suddenly trampling through our yard, farmers and hired hands picking up our possessions, the pickaxes, the shovel, the sledgehammers, their faces scowling to conceal their interest. Everyone was on the prowl, alert for a deal. The stock was inspected, the grade class scrutinized. The children ate hot dogs, drank pop, and played in the barn. Today, there was no privacy. No turning back, no silencing the auctioneer, no ceasing the bid. The farming, the secret was out. The farm was sold. There in the aftermath, between the crumpled coffee cups and the torn bidding cards, my father stood alone on the gangway, a generation away from me. From my hiding place upstairs in the barn, I could see him through the space between the barn boards. As I watched the last rays of the dying sun brush across his lean, wiry face. After all those years, all this work, his hair was still black as soil. His strong, tall stature gave no hint of weakness. What was he feeling beneath that stoic shield? Here, from my hiding place, I hoped that some secret would be revealed that would unravel the mystery of my father. His life had been tough, with very few breaks. He'd come from poverty, generations of it. He'd been born into a long lineage of hardship and struggle. His ancestors had been farmers, both here and the old country. His forebears had moved and shifted like nomads, and eventually carving out their existence on low, wet land. Land that would have been best left uncleared. They were men of misfortune, whose lives were maimed, marked, and ended by acts of God. 4 generations back, my great-grandfather was a pioneer of this country. Like the men of his day, he worked hard. He shod horses, he dug ditches, coiled hay. He never learned to read and write. Instead, he rose at 4 a.m. to fire the lime kilns. He raised 7 children on potatoes and pork cured in salt brine. One morning he woke while he was still in his 50s with a fever and then a rash developed. By nightfall, his body was convulsing in seizures. The doctor was called, but nothing could be done. Before antibiotics, spinal meningitis killed within days. His son, my grandfather, then became the tiller of the land. He fenced, picked stones, and stooped hay. He measured in rods and played the fiddle, and like his father before him, he thrashed grain, chopped wood, and rarely cried. One evening, after unhitching the horses from the seed drill, he set them free in the meadow where the young calves were drinking from their mothers. He turned to the house, unaware that he had planted his last seed of grain. It was after supper, and he lay on the couch. Behind him, on the windowsill, was the radio, but there was no reception because of the sudden storm outside. Without warning, a bolt of lightning struck and shattered the radio's area pole in the yard. The electricity charged down the wire that fed the house, blasting a hole through the concrete as it made its way to the radio battery under the couch. Up it shot, up through the man lying on the couch, burning an inch-wide furrow all along his side before exiting off his elbow into the counter. The ferroelectricity so damaged his nervous system that he was never able to go to the field again. Never again did he grease a plow or ride a horse. Instead, the legacy was passed on to my father. Dad was only 13 when he was forced to take over the farm. He was the first of his kind to go to school, to drive a tractor, to have running water. He was of the next generation, and he would succeed in rising out of this abyss of poverty. Yet his journey to higher ground would not be easy, for there was no escaping the elements of nature. It was autumn. In the sky hung a solitary cloud. My mother was alone in the house, quietly attending to her chores. From the kitchen window, she watched the next door neighbor plowing the field. He never stopped, for there was no storm and no rain. Yet, from this single black cloud came one bolt of lightning. A blast so intense that it blew the wooden box of the telephone right off the wall and across the kitchen. It laughed at the futile lightning rods guarding the buildings. It was a stroke so precise that it pierced through to the heart of the barn, burning it to the ground. My mother ran to untie the cows, to free the pigs, and chase out the sheep, but there was no saving the bandy hands, the crops, all the machinery. In a moment's time, the year's temple, the farm's harvest, had been rendered to ashes. Instead of rebuilding, my father moved here to this farm. The neighbors warned him against it. It's poor land, it will grow nothing. True, from the outside, it looked like no pearl. During the 30s, it had been abandoned, gone downhill, the floors heaved by frost, the windows cracked. But my dad, however, saw beneath its tattered edges, its chipped paint, and overgrown fields, he saw that at one time, before his birth, that this place must have flourished. Because in the house, there was an old relic of a furnace and a bathroom that had plumbing. In the barn, each cow had its separate water bowl that was connected through an elaborate system of troughs that were fed by gravity. Now, although none of these things work now, they had been installed in the 20s. Things that were rare even now in the 50s. My father saw the pearl in this tattered shell, so gathering together his scattered animals, his wife, and his child, he started again, risking the unknown. The land was prosperous. My father, shrewd and thrifty. The money was put back into the farm. The stable was remodeled, the cream cans and gravity water bowls were cast aside, replaced with coolers and milk quotas. The scrub cows were culled, making way for more lucrative purebreds. A dairy barn was built, a pipeline installed, and the cattle were sold worldwide. The land was tile drained, the barn painted, the house papered, paneled, enlarged. My father continued to polish this pearl until it gained a farm of desire, of note, of worth. Into this prosperity, I was born, a son of yet another generation. I went to Africa, Asia. As a boy, I was soft, emotional, not exactly a father's son. So, to harden me, he rejected my tears. I did not understand the lesson and resented it. So, in return, I rejected him. I threw out his religion, his politics. I stood up for the environment and put down his pesticides and his fertilizers. I questioned his methods, his livelihood. I identified with the animals, their isolation and pain. I would not appease my father and take over the farm. I spurned his efforts to pass on the learnings of his heritage, to protect me from the acts of God. I did not understand my father, for I did not know the cruelties of poverty. Never before had there been an auction sale in our family. In a few short hours, our lives were dispersed, carried off to a place where there was no land, no barn, no animals. What was my father feeling under that face that revealed so little? Did he wonder who had bought the pitchfork, the milk pails? Did he miss the cows, the newborn calf? That evening, my father and I separately said our goodbyes. As I watched him through the spaces in the barn boards, I could see in him my posture and my gestures. Then, unexpectedly, I saw a secret. He was crying. There on his cheeks were streaks of pain and disappointment. In his wet eyes, I realized the strength and courage that it had taken him to end this eternal era. That evening, my father stepped out of his coveralls, out of his work boots, and for the final time, he closed the barn door. Thank you.